So, yesterday, Palm Sunday, as you hold your palm crosses, as we did yesterday, we remember Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem on a donkey. And we heard, as Matt spoke, about the crowd's response. Can you imagine the noise, the pushing and the shoving of the people trying to get as close as they can to Jesus? I guess if you were watching the news a couple of weeks ago, modern equivalent would be like the Newcastle United team on their coach going through their town with their trophy, and the thousands of fans that came out to shout and scream and rejoice with their celebrations. But will the adulation last if the team start losing? How committed are they? And in a way, we see that change for Jesus. The crowds were shouting, Hosanna, but later on turned on him. So following his entry into Jerusalem, and Jesus knowing that in a few days' time he would be arrested and crucified, you might think he might take a few days off and put his feet up and spend the time with his friends, just having quality time together. But no, he doesn't, because he returns to Jerusalem and continues to challenge and confront the Jewish leaders as he walks around the city. And in Matthew's Gospel, he speaks about the fig tree. There are parables about the two sons, the tenants, a wedding banquet, paying taxes to Caesar. Then he goes on about the 7 woes, and all the time challenging the Jewish leaders. And then later on in the Gospels, we read that he's preparing his disciples for the future, their future, without him being by their side, by talking about the signs of the age, parable of the 10 virgins, the tenants, the sheep and the goats, and all the time watching and observing. There's a lot in there. He doesn't put his feet up. He's active because he knows that there's very little time left. And so he spends all this quality time with not only his disciples, but with the people as they listen to his teaching. And then as time goes on, and we're talking about the days leading up to the Passover, we come to a point where he almost sits down and takes a moment and observes this one person. And we have a reading now.
Jesus sat down opposite the place where the offerings were put and watched the crowd putting their money into the temple treasury. Many rich people threw in large amounts, but a poor widow came and put in 2 very small copper coins, worth only a few cents. Calling his disciples to him, Jesus said, "Truly, I tell you, this poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. They all gave out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in everything, all she had to live on."
Why did I choose this? Because I think it's not just about money. When he observes the woman, he sees and he tells his disciples she's given everything. And it's so easy to think that the rich people gave a lot. But Jesus is saying she's given not just her money, but her time, her thoughts. And I think that's the challenge for us this Holy Week. I don't know how you normally spend Holy Week, but for me it's poignant and it's important. And I don't sort of put my feet up on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday and then switch back in on a Thursday, because for me it's a journey. And I think that's the challenge for each of us, to journey with Jesus this week. And one of the things I'd like to encourage you to perhaps do is, as you know, there are 4 Gospels, so perhaps read the account from Palm Sunday up to Maundy Thursday from Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, taking one gospel each day. And it's amazing, there's a lot in Matthew. So don't just be 5 minutes, it's a bit longer. The other three are not quite so long, but the accounts are fascinating. And I think Jesus is asking us to give him time this week, as he gave his time, not only to his disciples, but to the people of Jerusalem, as he walked around and questioned and taught and spent as much time as he could with the people in the city and also his disciples. I don't know whether you've got particular Holy Week traditions, but for me, even as a child, various disciplines were instilled in me. And Holy Week has always been a very moving, emotional and reflectful week. So not just Palm Sunday and then a big jump to Maundy Thursday. And as the years have gone on, there has been various practices or disciplines that I've been involved in our various churches as we've moved around. And as many of you know, my husband was a vicar for many years. And so each church had a different tradition. But I think one of the most moving things that we did was particularly we were always in teams. We always worked in teams with 6 churches, and then the next parish was 6 churches, and then the final parish was 5. But through the week of Holy Week, we would prayer walk with our congregations from church to church on that journey, praying for the parish. We would walk the parish boundary. And it was so meaningful. And when we moved here, Keith and I continued to do that because it was very much part of our journey for Holy Week. And it's amazing how the Holy Spirit reveals so much about your community as you spend time walking its paths. And other things like outdoor dramas, as I was sharing with John earlier, on Good Friday, Passover meals on Maundy Thursday, washing of feet, various ways in which we can come closer to God, to understand the journey that Jesus made during those final days of his life here on earth. So I guess I'm going to give you a challenge, maybe as you go out this week, to perhaps walk up your own street and pray for your neighbours. You may know them by name, but if not, pray for that family who lives in that house. Bring them before the Lord, because that's what Jesus did. He was among the people. He cared about them. He wanted them to know him. And he questioned the authorities, the Jewish leaders, yes, challenging them on their position. But he also had compassion on those around him. One of the most moving things too is the opportunity just to listen to God's Holy Spirit as you walk those streets. Or even when you're walking down to the shop, as you pass each home or each shop, pray for the people who run it or the people who go in there. Bring them before the Lord. Take his blessing to each person that you meet. That might be frightening for some, because you think, I've got to tell them about my faith. Well, no, just pray for them. If you get the opportunity, great. Share what you believe. But just bringing people before God is such a powerful thing. So I encourage you to not just sit down and have your cup of tea these next few days, but take every opportunity to bring people before the Lord, just as Jesus did as he walked through Jerusalem, teaching, praying, listening, observing. Because just like the widow who gave all that she had, I think that's the challenge for us this week, that we give him all the time that we have, so that he can be as our focus for this Holy Week. There are various events that we'll talk about at the end of the service that are on offer for us to attend this week. But just think, What can I do for Jesus this week, this Holy Week, as we draw closer to experiencing what he did for us?